on average, the currency collapses every 30 to 40 years in most political jurisdictions for all of human history.
Your storehouse of value, whatever it is going to be deflated terribly during your lifetime.
The best currency of the last 100 years is the dollar. The winning currency of the 20th century, the best currency in the world, lost 99.9% of its value. That's a winner.
Okay, now you come across Bitcoin, and you talked about it as if it was abstracted gold.
If God's not going to set up Divine Bank and solve all your monetary problem, what's the second best idea? We don't trust the government. We don't trust a local bank. We don't trust each other. And we want the bank to last for 1,000 years. Let's go ahead and build out this Bitcoin network.
My guest today, Michael Saylor, started a number of successful companies, successful by almost every standard. It wasn't sufficient to expand out the full scope of his ambition. And I would say that in the most positive sense. He became deeply interested in 2020 in Bitcoin, in consequence, and has been at the forefront of a revolution in finance. His company now owns 3% of the Bitcoin in circulation, and the successful company that he built with blood, sweat, and tears, let's say 10 years ago, has become a hyper-successful company in consequence. He's been an evangelist for Bitcoin. He's used religious symbolism and terminology to describe it. He's on fire for Bitcoin. And we talked about things you really need to know today. You need to know who Michael Saylor is, where he got his ambition, how his grounding in fantasy and science fiction allied with the encouragement of his parents to produce the ambition in him that has culminated in this consequence. You need to know that Bitcoin is increasingly becoming an accepted monetary standard like gold around the world. There are revolutionary transformations on that basis in the last year, not least because of the new Trump administration. If you're young, or if you're middle-aged, or if you're old, and you're trying to understand how you will store the work that will comprise much of your life, you need to listen to this podcast and hear what Michael Saylor has to say. So you discovered Bitcoin, as I understand it, in March of 2020, which was relatively recently, and it had been around for a while, and you had been doing a lot of other things, but it moved your life laterally, as I understand it. And I'm curious, you're an engineer and a software engineer. I'm curious about what it was that you discovered and realized that produced this profound change in your orientation, and why you think it's justified, and why you evangelize for it as well, I guess.
I discovered Bitcoin 30 years into my career. So I started a company late 1989. For 30 years, I had been running an enterprise software company, MicroStrategy. We brought it public on the NASDAQ in 1998. Initially, we were focused upon one line of business, which is to sell software that allows banks or large retailers or insurance companies to analyze all of the data in their databases and assess risk and come up with marketing campaigns. Or if you wanted to figure out what sells with what and do market basket analysis or any kind of risk assessment, and you're a large enterprise, you would want to build a proprietary analytical system. We call that business intelligence. So that was successful. Then I was in my expansionary era in my 30s and in my 40s, and I wanted to create lots of things. And so I launched 10 other businesses. I bought up all the domain names like angel.com and alarm.com and strategy.com and hope.com. And I launched businesses, and some of them were singles, some were doubles. I bought voice.com. I sold it for $30 million. I sold the Angel business for about $100 million. The alarm.com business, we spun off. It's a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company today. And then I launched, I don't know, a dozen other things. They just whiffed. They failed.
What was your hit rate, just out of curiosity? Can you estimate it?
I would say that the thing I started with turned out to be the biggest success between 1990 and 2020. And then the next idea was a small, was a double, and the next one was a single, and the rest sputtered out. I spent a lot of time They were my favorite idea, a great idea. I loved them. I invested a lot of money in them. It turned out the world didn't think the same way I did. I either overcomplicated it. And so it's an important part of the story because by 2010, we had overexpanded as a company and we'd launched, I wanted to be the conglomerate, 10, like the 10 different things. And I found that the one thing worked and the other 9 things didn't work. And I needed to focus. So we refocused on the core business. And for the next decade, I had 2 dual experiences. I had the experience professionally, and I had an experience personally in finance. Here's the professional experience. I worked 2,500, 3,000 hours a year with 2,000 people doing 100,000 things right. I tried everything under the sun. We had a $500 million enterprise software business, and we found that we were the winner. 99 out of 100 of our competitors, or 99 other competitors had gone bankrupt or left the industry. We were the winner, and we were competing against Microsoft. And Microsoft is Microsoft. Mm-hmm. And so we were the pure play, call it the David against the Goliaths. And so for the next decade, I spent huge amounts of money on development. It didn't work. I spent huge amounts of money on marketing. It didn't work. I rebuilt every information system in the company. It didn't work. I obsessed over systems for HR, obsessed over systems for sales, for marketing. I spent huge amounts of money on digital advertising, everything you can imagine. I would fly around the world. I flew around the world for a month and I talked in every city, everywhere, in order to get the message out. So I had tried every conventional thing imaginable, and 10 years later, the company was still about a $500 million company. We were like a very low growth, and we were banging our head against a company, Microsoft, which is you could more easily leave the United States than you could leave the domain of Microsoft. They're just everywhere. So my professional experience is, I figured I'm not a stupid guy. I worked very hard. I had brilliant people working with me. We tried everything imaginable, but we could not dent, the digital monopolies of the world. And we were this, I'll call us a zombie company. It's a publicly traded company that makes money, that won't go out of business, that's uninteresting because it's not growing 20% or 30% a year. It's not Google. It's not Facebook. It's not a monster. But there are 10,000 companies like ours.
Right.
Most companies are like ours.
Sure.
So we were there, and then here's my personal experience. I got very fascinated with technology. I wrote a book called The Mobile Wave, and in The Mobile Wave that was
2012. That book?
I published it 2012. I wrote it 2010, 2011, and the theme of the book is, what happens when software dematerializes, when the software runs on a phone, when the computer goes from under your desk to in your hand, when it's no longer solid state or liquid state, but it's vapor state, and you go to sleep with the phone next to you? What kind of software would happen in the mobile world? And of course, we know all about it, right? The Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Ubers, all of these things became possible during the mobile era. They were inconceivable when the software ran on a computer. So the theme of the book is, software is going to leap from under our desk to our clothing. We'll wear it, we'll hold it, and it's going to become ubiquitous 24/7, 365, and it's going to change. We're going to dematerialize 27,000 devices. 20,000 device companies died so Apple could live. We're going to crush 20,000 retailers because everybody's going to want the Amazon. You're going to see 20,000 newspapers crushed because Google and Facebook eats them. And, the message of the book is, you probably ought to just buy the Amazon stock or buy the Apple stock. And as an investor, I took, a decent amount of money, call it $25 million that I'd made over the previous 20 years as a CEO and as a founder of a company. I invested in these stocks and I 20x'd it. If how do you make money in the tech world? You invest in something everybody needs, nobody can stop, and very few people understand. Like most people will, in the year 2010, if you had said, hey, I really think that Amazon's going to work, people would have said, you're crazy. Amazon's losing money. No one's going to do this, and they would have thought you're nuts. And if you had said, I remember with Apple, you say, well, Apple, I think this iPhone's a cool thing. They would say, well, no, eventually it'll go to the price of $25 a phone like Nokia. It's going to be commoditized. They can't hold, their margins are too high. They're going to actually have their margins collapse like Dell or like Nokia. And of course, the conventional wisdom was Apple's not a good investment. Amazon's not a good investment. Facebook, what is this goofy thing? And of course, for the next decade, here's what happened. I work an hour a month as an investor and I get rich. Make $500 million. Not working, embarrassing. All you got to do is just buy the Magnificent Seven in 2010. And the conventional wisdom on Wall Street is if the stock doubles, you should diversify. You should sell half of it. If Apple doubles in price, go buy some IBM and some HP and some other computer company. If it doubles again, you sell some more of the portfolio and you buy the thing. And their thought was you got to stay diversified. But the problem is Apple won, everybody else lost. At one point, Apple made all the money in the mobile phone business. Everybody else collectively lost money to compete with them. Amazon won.
Samsung as well? All of them?
Yeah, if you look at the winners in this era, right? I mean, Apple was a winner. Amazon was a winner. Google, Facebook were a winner. Samsung is the winner in the Far East. Walmart kept up. Every other retailer, it's like there's 2 or 3 that kind of keep up. Maybe a Walmart, maybe a Target, but there's 20,000 that went out of business.
Do you think that's partly a consequence of is there a radically centralizing tendency of the mobile world?
There is.
And so it's increasingly a winner-take-all. Because when everyone's connected, the Pareto distribution goes out of control. That's what it looks like to me. There's like one person occupies each niche or one company because everything's connected. There's no micro markets anymore.
These all became dominant digital monopolies. And they became dominant because Apple could ship a new feature to the iPhone over the weekend to 1 billion people for the cost of the electricity. And before Apple, you would have to, Kodak or Polaroid or fill in the blank, would have to create a new device. It would take a year, and then they would have to sell it, and it would take another year, and there's a variable cost to it. So when the functionality becomes software, there's a 99% gross margin, and you can give it to 100 million, 1 billion, right? Apple could do Apple Music and give it to 1 billion people.
IP ownership matters.
Right, and so they dominated the rails, and they had these. I used to say Apple's going to be the most valuable company in the world because it's the most valuable company in the world because it's the first time one company could deliver a feature to 1 billion people overnight. That, we never had that 30 years ago or 40 years ago. So there are all these natural monopolies that built, and at some point, Microsoft dominated, business software and Facebook.
How did you see that early? I mean, the companies you listed off, that was pretty good. That was a pretty good hit list. And like you said, you worked yourself half to death, but all the money that you made, or the majority of the money you made, was actually a consequence of an hour a month in investment strategy. But like what? And this is germane to the Bitcoin question, because one of the things you're doing is setting up the circumstance. You saw the direction the digital world was going. You bet money on it, which is actually an indication of commitment to it. And the bets that you made paid off. And they paid off in some ways more than your hard work on the business front.
You got to roll back to, first grade.